Hello, dear friend. Now you will listen to the answers to the questions that come to mind before going to bed. Lie back and enjoy listening. What are Children's Crusades? The Children's Crusades is a conventional name for the events of the early 13th century, primarily in 1212, when spontaneous religious movements arose in Europe involving children, teenagers, and the poorest segments of the population, inspired by the idea of liberating the Holy Land without weapons. Unlike the official crusades organized by the papacy and the feudal nobility, these movements did not have a clear structure, military plan, or church support, although they used Christian symbols. The very name Children's Crusade appeared later and is in many ways generalizing, since among the participants were not only children, but it was their image that became central in legends and chronicles. It is believed that the movement was based on the belief that the purity and innocence of children could achieve what the armored knights could not, and that God would perform a miracle by parting the sea in front of the pilgrims, as it was in the biblical story of Moses. In 1212, charismatic teenage preachers appeared in various regions of Europe, primarily in France and Germany, claiming to have had a vision or a divine sign. In France, such a leader was a shepherd named Stephen of Cloyes, who claimed that Christ himself appeared to him in the form of a beggar and instructed him to lead the children to Jerusalem. Thousands of people, mostly young and poor, followed him, moving to the Mediterranean Sea in the hope that the path to the Holy Land would open miraculously. In Germany, a similar movement was led by a boy named Nikolai, who gathered crowds of followers who crossed the Alps and reached Italy, suffering from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. The reality of these campaigns turned out to be far from the lofty expectations. No miracles happened, the sea did not part, and the participants faced the harsh reality of the medieval world. Many children died on the way, others were abandoned without means of livelihood, and some, according to chroniclers, could be sold into slavery by unscrupulous merchants who promised to ship them to the East. Historians argue about the scale of the tragedy, as medieval sources often exaggerated or distorted the events, trying to give them a moral or symbolic character. Some modern researchers believe that it was not about a mass march of exclusively children, but about religious processions and pilgrimages of the poor, which were attended by both young people and adults without property. Nevertheless, the image of children walking towards a holy goal is firmly entrenched in European cultural memory as a symbol of naive faith and cruel disappointment. The Church did not officially approve of these movements and eventually tried to distance itself from them, emphasizing that crusades should be organized only with the blessing of the Pope. The Children's Crusades became a kind of reflection of the spiritual crisis of the era, when the expectation of a miracle, fear of sin, and the desire for immediate salvation were intertwined with social poverty and lack of education. They show how strong the belief in supernatural intervention was, and how vulnerable children and ordinary people found themselves in a world where religious fervor easily turned into tragedy. Today, Children's Crusades are seen not as a military action, but as a complex socio-religious phenomenon of the Middle Ages, reminding of how dangerous good intentions can be, devoid of knowledge, protection, and responsibility. How do starlings choose their home? Starlings choose their home not by chance, but as a result of a complex and rather thoughtful process that combines instincts, experience, and observation of the environment. These birds belong to the so-called secondary nesting species. That is, they do not build nests from scratch on branches, but prefer to use ready-made cavities. In the wild, these can be hollows of old trees, cracks in trunks, holes left by woodpeckers, or natural depressions in rocks. Near humans, starlings readily inhabit birdhouses, building vents, roof niches, and even voids in pillars. The main selection criterion is safety. The cavity should be narrow enough so that a large predator cannot crawl into it, and at the same time, spacious enough to accommodate laying and feeding chicks. Depth is also important. The deeper the entrance is from the bottom of the nest, the better the eggs and chicks are protected from the weather and enemies. The location of the future house plays an important role. Starlings prefer to settle near open spaces, meadows, pastures, arable land, where it is easy to forage. At the same time, there should be trees or buildings nearby from which it is convenient to observe the surroundings. Water is also important. The presence of a stream, pond, or moist soil makes it easier to find insects, especially in spring. An important factor is the microclimate inside the cavity. Starlings avoid places that are too damp and cold, but overheating is also dangerous for them, so they often choose nests oriented so that the direct midday sun does not get inside. The process of choosing a home usually begins with an active survey of the territory by males. They arrive before the females and start looking for suitable places, looking into hollows and birdhouses, sometimes even spending the night in them. Having found a successful option, the male begins to attract the female with a song, often singing it right at the entrance to the nest or from the inside, demonstrating that housing has already been found. The female, in turn, evaluates the proposed location and can either agree or reject it, forcing the male to continue searching. The competition for good nesting grounds among starlings is very high. They often get into fights with other starlings, as well as with sparrows, chickadees, and even larger birds, defending the cavity they like. Sometimes starlings take over already occupied nests, expelling the former owners. After choosing a house, its arrangement begins. Starlings do not just stack the litter, but carefully select the materials. Dry grass, leaves, feathers, pieces of moss, and sometimes fragrant plants, such as wormwood or yarrow, are brought to the nest. It is believed that the smell of these herbs can scare away parasites or slow down their reproduction. Interestingly, experienced couples often choose the same places from year to year, if they are successful. Young starlings learn this by watching adults and memorizing safe areas. At the same time, they are able to quickly adapt to new conditions. In cities, starlings master artificial structures that their ancestors never used, demonstrating amazing flexibility of behavior. Thus, choosing a home for starlings is not just following an instinct, but a complex decision based on safety, access to food, protection from the climate, and social experience. It is thanks to this ability to find and evaluate suitable places that starlings have been able to spread widely across different continents and successfully live alongside humans without losing their natural habits. Who is William the Conqueror? William the Conqueror is one of the most famous rulers of the Middle Ages, a man who forever changed the history of England and had a huge impact on the development of the entire Western Europe. He was born around 1028 in Normandy and was named William of Normandy at birth. Since childhood, his background made him an unusual and controversial figure, since he was the illegitimate son of the Norman Duke Robert. In an era when origin meant almost everything, this circumstance put him in a vulnerable position and caused many conflicts. Nevertheless, after his father's death, young William inherited the title of Duke of Normandy, and from an early age was forced to fight for his right to power. His childhood was spent among conspiracies, rebellions, and constant death threats, which hardened his character and made him a tough, determined, and extremely cautious ruler. As William grew older, he managed not only to hold Normandy, but also to turn it into one of the most powerful and organized possessions of France. He relied on loyal vassals, strengthened military discipline, and actively used the feudal system, binding the nobility with obligations of service and loyalty. The key moment of his life was his claim to the English throne. England was then ruled by King Edward the Confessor, who had no direct heirs. According to one version, Edward promised the throne to William, but after his death in 1066, the Anglo-Saxon aristocrat Harold Godwinson was proclaimed king. William regarded this as a violation of the oath and began to prepare for the invasion. He managed to enlist the support of the Pope, presenting his enterprise as fair and legitimate, and also gathered a large army and fleet. In the autumn of 1066, the Norman army crossed the English Channel and landed in the south of England. The decisive battle took place on October 14th, 1066, at Hastings. The battle lasted for an entire day and was extremely fierce.
William proved himself to be a skilled commander, managing to keep the army from panicking and using tactics, including a false retreat. During the battle, King Harold died, and this actually decided the outcome of the war. After the victory, William continued to conquer the country, suppressing resistance and subjugating England step by step. In December 1066, he was crowned King of England, earning the nickname the Conqueror. His reign was an era of profound transformation. William replaced most of the Anglo-Saxon nobility with Norman barons, which completely changed the structure of power in the country. He introduced a strict feudal system in which all land was considered to belong to the king, and vassals received it only in exchange for service. To control the country, William ordered the construction of castles, many of which became centers of royal power. One of the most important achievements of his reign was the creation of the famous Domesday Book, a detailed census of England's lands and property conducted in 1086. This document made it possible to accurately account for taxes and resources, and is still considered a unique source on the history of the Middle Ages. William ruled harshly, sometimes brutally, especially suppressing uprisings in the north of the country, but at the same time, he strove for order and manageability. He died in 1087, leaving behind a state that became the foundation of the future English monarchy. William the Conqueror went down in history as a man who united the Norman and Anglo-Saxon traditions, changed the language, culture, and system of government of England, and showed how the personal will and determination of one person can influence the fate of an entire country. How does a leech treat a disease? The leech has been used in medicine since ancient times and is one of the most unusual and, at first glance, paradoxical medical instruments known to man. Treatment with leeches is called hirudotherapy and was used in ancient Egypt, India, and ancient Greece, where it was believed that bloodletting helps restore balance in the body. For a long time, leeches were used for almost all diseases, often without understanding the real mechanism of their action, which is why the method gained a dubious reputation. However, modern research has shown that the medicinal leech does have unique biological properties that can be beneficial for certain diseases.
The main therapeutic effect is not so much related to blood loss as to the substances that the leech releases when it bites. When a leech sticks to the skin, it injects saliva into the blood, containing a complex set of biologically active compounds. The most famous of these is hirudin, a substance that prevents blood clotting. Thanks to it, the blood at the bite site becomes more liquid, its circulation improves, and the risk of blood clots decreases. In addition to hirudin, leech saliva contains enzymes that dilate blood vessels, reduce inflammation, and reduce pain. That is why the bite of a leech is usually almost not felt, and after the procedure, many patients note a feeling of warmth and relaxation in the treated area. Leeches are especially useful where venous blood flow is disrupted. For example, in vascular surgery and plastic medicine, they are used to save transplanted tissues. If blood does not flow well from the transplanted area after surgery, dangerous stagnation occurs, which can lead to tissue death. By sucking out excess blood and simultaneously improving microcirculation, the leech helps restore normal blood flow until the body forms new vessels. Also, hirudotherapy is sometimes used for varicose veins, certain forms of arthritis, headaches, and diseases associated with circulatory disorders. Another important effect is related to the anti-inflammatory properties of leech saliva. The enzymes it secretes can reduce edema and slow down the development of inflammatory processes in tissues. This makes the procedure useful for chronic inflammation of joints and soft tissues. In addition, it is believed that the leech has a reflex effect, since it is placed on certain areas of the body associated with internal organs. In this aspect, hirudotherapy partly echoes acupuncture, although its mechanisms are explained in terms of physiology, not energy channels. It is important to understand that modern medicine uses only specially grown medicinal leeches that are kept in sterile conditions. Each leech is used only once, after which it is disposed of to eliminate the risk of transmission of infections. Using leeches on your own, or resorting to questionable practices, can be dangerous and lead to complications. After the procedure, blood may ooze out of the wound for some time, which is a normal effect of the action of hirudin, but requires proper care. Despite the proven benefits in some cases, hirudotherapy is not a universal method and cannot replace traditional treatment. It is used as an auxiliary procedure and only for medical reasons. Some people have contraindications, such as blood clotting disorders, anemia, or allergies to components of leech saliva. Thus, the leech does not treat the disease in a mystical way, and not through simple bloodletting, but through a complex set of biologically active substances that improve blood circulation, reduce inflammation, and help the body restore impaired processes. This ancient method, reinterpreted by modern science, remains an example of how nature can suggest unexpected but effective treatment methods to humans. Where were skis invented? Skis are one of the most ancient inventions of mankind, appearing long before written history, and their origin is closely related to the harsh climatic conditions of the northern regions of Eurasia. Archaeological finds show that the first skis originated as a means of transportation through deep snow, and not as sports equipment. The oldest evidence of ski use has been found in modern Russia, Scandinavia, and Siberia. Wooden skis dating back more than 5,000 years have been found in swamps and peat bogs, and rock carvings in northern Norway and Altai depict people moving through the snow using long planks attached to their feet. This suggests that the idea of skiing originated independently from different peoples who lived in similar natural conditions, where winter lasted most of the year. The peoples of Siberia and the Urals have played a particularly important role in the history of skiing. Among the Khanty, Mansi, Evenks, and other northern peoples, skiing was an integral part of everyday life. They were used for hunting, moving between settlements, and transporting goods. Interestingly, many ancient skis were asymmetrical. One was long and smooth for sliding, while the other was shorter and covered with fur to push off and not slip back. This design made it possible to move efficiently over rough terrain and even climb uphill. Skiing also appeared very early in Scandinavia and eventually became an important cultural element. Already in the Old Norse myths and sagas, gods and heroes who move on skis are mentioned. The very word for skiing in many European languages is of Scandinavian origin. This indicates that it was through the northern peoples that knowledge about skiing gradually spread to the south. However, it is important to understand that Scandinavia was not the only place where they were invented, but rather a region where the ski tradition was preserved and developed especially actively. In ancient China, on the territory of modern Xinjiang, evidence of the use of skis has also been found several thousand years ago. Local hunters used wooden planks and sticks to move through the snow-covered mountains. This confirms that skiing was not an invention of one people or one civilization, but became a human response to the universal problem of movement in the winter landscape. Initially, the skis were rough and simple, carved from a single piece of wood and fitted to the shape of the foot. They were lubricated with animal fat or resin to improve gliding. With the development of craft and tools, skis became lighter and more elegant. In the Middle Ages in Northern Europe, skiing began to be used not only in everyday life, but also for military purposes. Scandinavian warriors and border guards skied faster than the enemy, which gave them a strategic advantage. Over time, the practical means of transportation began to turn into an element of competition and entertainment. Already in the 18th century, the first ski racing competitions were held in Norway, and in the 19th century, skiing became a symbol of national culture and physical endurance. Thus, the answer to the question of where skiing was invented is not limited to a single point on the map. They appeared where people needed to survive in the snow, and above all, in the northern regions of Eurasia, from Siberia to Scandinavia. Skiing has become one of those inventions that were born out of necessity, and over time has become a part of world culture and sports, preserving the memory of the ancient human experience of adapting to nature and learning to move with it, not against it. Why do rooks like to walk around the arable land? Rooks often walk around the arable land not because of a random coincidence, but because the plowed fields are ideal for their lifestyle and methods of foraging. These birds belong to the Vranov family and are distinguished by a high level of intelligence, good memory, and the ability to adapt to environmental changes. An arable land for a rook is a kind of open table where a person unwittingly helps birds to find food. When the earth is plowed, the topsoil turns over, and insects, larvae, worms, mollusks, and plant seeds that were previously hidden underground come to the surface. For rooks, which feed mainly on invertebrates and plant foods, this is a real source of energy, especially in spring, when birds need a lot of energy for nesting and feeding their chicks. Rooks have keen eyesight and quickly notice any changes on the Earth's surface. They recognize a freshly plowed field from afar by the color and structure of the soil. The dark, loose ground signals that it is easy to find prey here without spending a lot of effort on digging. Unlike dense turf or overgrown meadows, Arable land allows a bird to simply walk and peck at anything that catches its eye. That is why rooks often move around the field on foot, carefully examining the ground and making quick, precise movements with their beaks. Another reason for rooks' love of arable land is safety. The open space allows you to notice an approaching predator in advance. Rooks are gregarious birds, and they usually feed in groups in the field. While some are looking for food, others are monitoring the situation, giving alarm signals in case of danger. This collective strategy makes feeding more efficient and less risky. In addition, arable land is often located near human settlements, and rooks have long learned to live next door to humans, taking advantage of the anthropogenic landscape.
Interestingly, rooks are especially active in visiting fields during certain periods of the year. In spring, they look for protein, rich food for their future offspring. And in autumn, they look for seeds and crop residues to store energy before the cold weather. At the same time, rooks are able to remember successful feeding sites and return there from year to year. If a field is regularly plowed and sown, birds include it in their permanent route. Sometimes you can see how rooks literally accompany the tractor, moving after it and picking up everything that appears on the surface of the earth. This behavior shows their ability to quickly connect human actions with the appearance of food. Despite popular belief, rooks bring agriculture not only harm, but also benefit. By eating a large number of harmful insect larvae, they reduce the number of organisms that can damage crops. In the past, rooks were even considered a kind of agricultural assistance. However, with large concentrations of birds, they can also eat the seeds of cultivated plants, which is why people's attitude towards them was ambiguous. From the point of view of the rooks themselves, arable land is the result of a long evolutionary adaptation to a changing world. Initially, their ancestors fed in natural open spaces, such as floodplains and steppes. But with the development of agriculture, birds quickly mastered new food sources. Their ability to learn, observe, and share experiences within the pack has allowed them to successfully integrate into agricultural landscapes. Thus, the rook's love of walking in the arable land is explained by a combination of the availability of food, safety, convenience of finding food, and the high adaptability of these birds. For a rook, a plowed field is not just a piece of land, but an important part of its habitat, where humans and nature unexpectedly find themselves allies, even if they don't always realize it. How did the Olympic Games come about? The Olympic Games originated in ancient times and were closely related to the religious beliefs and lifestyle of the ancient Greeks, for whom sport, the cult of the gods, and social life formed a single whole. It is believed that the first Olympic Games were held in 776 BC in the city of Olympia, located on the Peloponnese Peninsula. It was this date that was later adopted by the ancient Greeks as the starting point of their chronology, which, in itself, shows the great importance of these competitions. The games were held in honor of the supreme god Zeus and were part of a large religious festival that included sacrifices, processions, and solemn ceremonies. There are mythological versions of the origin of the Olympic Games. According to one of them, they were founded by Zeus himself after defeating his father, Kronos. According to another, by the hero Hercules, who established competitions as a sign of gratitude to the gods for his exploits. These myths emphasized the divine origin of games and gave them a sacred status. However, historically, the Olympic Games arose as a form of peaceful rivalry between Greek polities, which were often in a state of war and conflict. During the Games, a special truce was declared, called the Sacred Peace, which allowed athletes and spectators to safely reach Olympia. Violating this truce was considered a grave crime against the gods. Initially, the program of the Games was extremely modest. The only competition was a short distance race, equal to the length of the stadium. The winner became the only champion of the entire Olympiad, and his name was entered in the official records. Over time, the program expanded, and new types of competitions appeared, such as wrestling, fistfighting, pentathlon, chariot racing, and long-distance running. All participants performed naked, which symbolized the ideal of harmony of body and spirit, and emphasized the equality of athletes before the gods. Only free Greek men could participate in the Olympic Games. Women and slaves were excluded from the competition, and there was even a ban on women from the stadium. The preparation for the Games took years. The athletes trained in gymnasiums, followed a strict regime, and obeyed the rules, which were supervised by special judges. Winning the Olympic Games did not bring material rewards, but great fame. The champion was crowned with a wreath of olive branches, but upon his return to his homeland, he was greeted as a hero, exempted from taxes, statues were erected, and poems were dedicated to him. Thus, the Olympic Games have become an important social elevator and a way to glorify your city. Over time, the significance of the Games went far beyond sports. Philosophers, poets, historians, and politicians flocked to Olympia, where they read their works, formed alliances, and discussed important issues. The Games became a kind of center of the cultural and intellectual life of ancient Greece. However, with the decline of the ancient world and the spread of Christianity, the Olympic Games gradually lost their significance. In 393 AD, Roman Emperor Theodosius I banned them as a pagan rite. For many centuries, the tradition was interrupted. The revival of the Olympic Games took place only at the end of the 19th century, thanks to the French public figure Pierre de Coubertin, who saw in ancient competitions the ideal of harmonious personal education. He proposed to create international sports games that unite the peoples of the world. In 1896, Athens hosted the first modern Olympic Games, which became a symbol of peaceful rivalry and cooperation. Thus, the Olympic Games emerged as a religious holiday, became an essential element of ancient Greek culture, and centuries later were revived as a global event that preserves the idea of fair competition and human striving for physical and spiritual perfection. Is the blood of birds warm? The blood of birds is really warm, and this is one of the key features of their body that distinguishes them from reptiles, amphibians, and fish. Birds are warm-blooded, or more precisely, homoiothermic animals, which means the ability to maintain a constant body temperature regardless of the ambient temperature. Usually, the body temperature of most birds ranges from 40 to 42 degrees Celsius, which is even higher than that of humans and most mammals. Such a high temperature is associated with a very intensive metabolism, which is necessary primarily for birds to fly. Flying requires a lot of energy, and in order for muscles to work efficiently, the body must constantly produce and store heat. The source of this heat is food, which is converted into energy during metabolism. The bird's heart works fast and powerfully, providing a constant supply of oxygen to the tissues, and the blood serves as the main heat carrier throughout the body. That is why the blood of birds is not just warm, but plays an important role in the even distribution of temperature. The ability to retain heat is especially important for birds living in cold regions or making long-distance flights at high altitudes, where air temperatures can be extremely low. In order not to lose precious heat, birds have a whole range of adaptations. Their body is covered with feathers, which create an air layer and act as an excellent thermal insulator. There is a layer of down under the feathers that keeps warm air close to the skin. The circulatory system is also designed in a special way. In the legs and wings of many species, a countercurrent heat exchange mechanism operates, in which warm blood coming from the body gives off heat to cold blood returning back, which reduces heat loss. Thanks to this, for example, birds can stand on ice or in cold water without losing too much heat. Warm-blooded nature gives birds serious advantages. It allows them to be active at any time of the year and day, regardless of weather conditions. Unlike cold-blooded animals that need to bask in the sun, birds can fly, hunt, and search for food even in the cold or at night. This significantly expands their ecological capabilities and helps them occupy a wide variety of niches, from Arctic deserts to tropical forests. However, warm-bloodedness has its price. To maintain a high body temperature, birds need a large amount of food. Therefore, many of them spend a significant part of their time searching for food, and when there is a shortage, they quickly lose their strength. This explains the need for flights in many species that travel to warmer climes following an abundance of food. Interestingly, despite their general warm-blooded nature, birds are able to temporarily lower their body temperature. At night, or during periods of food shortage, some species fall into a state similar to light hibernation, in which body temperature and metabolism decrease, which saves energy. This condition is especially typical for small birds, such as hummingbirds. Nevertheless, even in these cases, their temperature remains above the ambient temperature. From an evolutionary point of view, warm-blooded birds arose as a result of a gradual increase in the activity and metabolic rate of their ancestors. It is believed that the common ancestors of birds and dinosaurs already possessed certain traits related to maintaining heat. This has helped birds survive global climate change and take a leading position in the air environment. Thus, warm blood in birds is not just a biological fact, but the basis of their mobility, endurance, and ability to live in almost any environment. It is thanks to this property that birds remain one of the most successful and widespread animals on the planet, combining ease of flight with inner constancy and warmth, which they carry with them even to the coldest corners of the earth. What do the Olympic rings symbolize? Olympic rings are one of the most recognizable symbols of modern sports, created at the beginning of the 20th century and became the embodiment of the idea of international cooperation, friendship, and fair competition. The symbol was designed by French Baron Pierre de Coubertin in 1913, 3 years before the first modern Olympic Games in 1916, which, however, did not take place due to the First World War. The 5 rings are intertwined with each other, forming a single chain that symbolizes the connection of the 5 parts of the world: Europe, Asia, Africa, America, and Oceania, and the idea that the Olympic Games unite people from all continents. Each color of the ring has its own meaning. It is known that the official flag uses blue, yellow, black, green, and red rings on a white background. These colors were not chosen by chance. The white background and the colors of the rings, along with the symbol, include all the national colors that are present on the flags of all countries of the world. Thus,
The symbol embodies the principle of universality and openness of the Olympiad for any state. The interlacing of the rings also has a deep meaning. It shows that the continents do not exist in isolation, but are connected to each other by a common goal, the desire for peace and friendship through sport. Each ring is inextricably linked to the others, which emphasizes the idea of interdependence and cooperation. Coubertin's original goal was not just to create a beautiful logo, but to convey the philosophy of the Olympic movement, where competition and the struggle for victory are accompanied by respect for the opponent and for their own culture. At the time of the symbol's creation, the Olympic Games already had a rich history, and Coubertin sought to emphasize that in the modern world, sport can serve as a tool for bringing nations closer together, despite differences in language, religion, and political systems. Over time, Olympic rings began to be used not only on flags and official documents, but also on medals, athletes' uniforms, stadiums, and even architectural elements of the Olympics. They have become a universal sign, recognizable all over the world, and in fact, a symbol of the Olympic movement itself. In addition to their ideological significance, rings also have an aesthetic function. Their simple, harmonious shape, smooth weave, and vibrant color scheme make them attractive and easy to remember. This visual image helps people of all ages and cultures identify the Olympics instantly, creating an emotional connection with sporting events. Curiously, there have been changes in the history of the symbol's use. In the early years, the rings could be depicted slightly differently. Their sizes, line thickness, and location could vary, but the basic idea of the intertwined rings remained unchanged. Over time, the International Olympic Committee has established strict rules for the use of the symbol to preserve its uniqueness and recognition. Olympic rings are also often interpreted as a reminder of each athlete's personal responsibility. They symbolize the pursuit of excellence, perseverance, discipline, and willingness to accept challenges, as well as the need to respect the rules and rivals. In addition, rings have been used in educational and awareness-raising programs of the Olympic movement, where their explanation helps children and youth understand the values of sport and teamwork, as well as the importance of international cooperation. Thus, the Olympic rings are not just a decorative sign, but a multi-layered symbol that includes the idea of global unity, respect for diversity, striving for excellence, and the spirit of peaceful competition. They remind us that sport is able to connect people, overcome differences, and inspire personal growth. And that is why this image remains relevant and significant all over the world, from the first games of ancient Greece to the modern Olympics. Why do ants need scouts? Ants are one of the most organized and social insects on Earth, and scouts play a special, vital role in their colony. Scouts are usually worker ants who receive a special task to explore the environment, find new food sources, identify threats, and transmit information to the rest of the colony. Their activities ensure the survival of the entire ant society and the effectiveness of collective action. Unlike ordinary workers, scouts behave more cautiously, are attentive to details, and are able to assess potential danger. Once a scout finds food, it uses chemical signals, pheromones, to direct other ants to prey. This process looks almost like navigating an invisible map. The ants follow the scent trail created by the scout, and thus the entire colony gets access to new resources without having to search for them themselves, which saves time and effort. Scouts are also responsible for the safety of the anthill. They patrol the area around the colony, checking for predators, competitors, and any potential threats. If a scout detects danger, he returns to the anthill and leaves a warning signal, after which the workers and soldiers are ready to defend themselves. This is especially important for species that build open anthills or nests on the ground's surface, where an attack can be swift and destructive. Interestingly, scouts have the ability to assess the distance and quality of a food source. If the prey is large and nutritious, the ant leaves a stronger and longer scent trail to attract more companions. If the source is scarce, the signal may be weak or not at all, so that the colony does not waste resources. In addition, scouts are often involved in exploring new places to build or expand an anthill. They examine the soil, check for moisture, density, and potential obstacles so that workers can build safer and more comfortable homes. The behavior of scouts is an example of collective intelligence. Despite the fact that each ant acts almost automatically, interaction and information exchange create complex systems that allow the colony to make effective decisions. It is believed that such strategies have made ants one of the most successful social insects on the planet. Scouts also demonstrate a high degree of adaptability. They are able to change their search routes depending on the time of year, weather conditions, and the activity of other insect species. If the previously laid pheromone path no longer leads to prey, they create a new one, correcting the behavior of the entire group. This shows that scouts do not just perform mechanical functions, but actively participate in the process of collective learning. Without scouts, the life of the ant colony would be chaotic and ineffective. They ensure a stable supply of food, warn of threats in time, contribute to the expansion of the territory, and strengthen social ties between members of the colony. Even with their small size and limited individual capabilities, scouts ensure the organization and survival of the entire community. In general, the role of scouts in ants is a great example of how social animals can use distributed intelligence, special roles, and complex communications to solve common problems. Their activities combine observation, strategy, and precise signal execution, which allows the anthill to successfully exist in a volatile and often dangerous environment. Scouts are the eyes and ears of the colony, which make it possible to coordinate actions, protect against enemies, and make efficient use of resources. And it is thanks to them that ants remain one of the most organized and adaptable creatures on Earth. Who invented boxing? Boxing, as a type of martial art using fists, has ancient roots, and it is impossible to name one specific inventor since it was formed gradually in different cultures. Historical data show that the first mentions of fist fighting date back to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia around the 3rd millennium BC. Drawings of tombs and temple walls depict men fighting with their bare hands, often in a ritual or sporting context. These battles were not only entertaining, but also served as training for warriors, preparing for battles and demonstrating strength and endurance. In ancient Greece, boxing received a more formalized structure and was included in the Olympic Games program starting in 688 BC. Greek athletes used leather straps called chimera to protect their hands and wrists, and fights were held until one of the participants was knocked out or refused. The rules were simple, but even then there were concepts of permissible and prohibited strokes. In Rome, boxing became part of the gladiator's arsenal of entertainment, where fights could be deadly. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, interest in fistfighting waned, but traditions persisted in European folk competitions, especially in England and Ireland. Since the 17th century, boxing began to take shape as an organized sport there. The first rules appeared, known as the London Rules or the Buckland Rules, which regulated the length of rounds, prohibited blows to the back of the head, and used special gloves to soften blows. It was during this period that the modern image of boxing as a martial art, and not just a fight, was formed. In the 19th century, English boxer John Jackson is considered one of the first champions who popularized boxing among the general public and contributed to the emergence of the first professional fights. In 1867, the Marquesan Rules, Queensberry Rules, were adopted, which finally consolidated the use of gloves, rounds, and defined the basic rules of modern sports. From that moment on, boxing became safer and more structured, which allowed it to gain wide recognition and become an official competition. In the 20th century, boxing continued to develop and spread around the world, becoming part of the Olympic Games in 1904. Weight classes, professional and amateur leagues appeared, which made boxing accessible to various athletes and contributed to the formation of famous champions whose names became legends. Thus, boxing as an art and sport does not have a single inventor, but is a product of the centuries-old evolution of human culture and physical activity. Its roots go back to ancient civilizations, where fistfighting performed ritual, educational, and recreational functions. Then it acquired an organized form in the ancient world, experienced a decline and revival in the Middle Ages, and became a modern sport due to the formalization of rules in 19th century England. Today, boxing is a global sport that combines strength, endurance, strategy, and technique, and it retains its connection with the ancient traditions of fighting for honor, skill, and victory, demonstrating how the art of fist-fighting, which originated thousands of years ago, has become a cultural phenomenon and a way of human self-expression. Who are forest giraffes? Forest giraffes are a subspecies of giraffe that differs from its savanna relatives not only in its habitat, but also in its lifestyle, eating habits, and some anatomical features. Unlike the giraffes we are used to, which live in the open savannas of Africa, forest giraffes inhabit the dense tropical and subtropical forests of Central Africa, particularly in Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Gabon. Due to the dense vegetation and limited space, these giraffes have developed several unique adaptations. First of all, their sizes are usually smaller than those of savanna giraffes. The height of adults ranges from about 3 to 4 meters, which makes it easier to move between trees and branches. Forest giraffes also have a shorter and tighter neck, which makes it easier to maneuver in the forest environment and reduces the risk of injury. The coat color of these animals is also different. The spots are darker, with clearer contours, and the background is more saturated. This coloring helps to disguise oneself among the shadows of the forest and foliage, which is especially important for protection from predators such as leopards and hyena dogs. The diet of forest giraffes is also adapted to the conditions of dense forests. They feed mainly on the leaves, shoots, and fruits of trees and shrubs that cross their path. Unlike savanna giraffes, which often eat acacia trees at a height of 6 meters or more, forest giraffes consume vegetation at an average level, where light reaches and access to the leaves is more dense. Due to this, they play an important role in the ecosystem. They help to spread the seeds of trees and shrubs, regulate vegetation growth, and contribute to the maintenance of forest biodiversity. Forest giraffes lead a more secretive and cautious lifestyle than their savanna relatives. Due to the dense forest, they rely less on speed and vision to detect predators, instead using careful and quiet movement, constant surveillance, and communication through low-frequency sounds that can be transmitted over long distances through the forest. They also form smaller groups, usually from 2 to 6 individuals, which reduces the likelihood of being spotted by a predator. Reproduction of forest giraffes has its own characteristics. Pregnancy lasts about 15 months, as in savanna species, but childbirth more often takes place in secluded places, among dense vegetation, to hide the newborn from predators. Young giraffes grow more slowly than their savanna relatives, as food resources in the forest are unevenly distributed, and they need more time to learn camouflage and orientation skills in a difficult environment to survive. Forest giraffes are seriously threatened by humans. Deforestation, poaching, and habitat destruction reduce their numbers and make them vulnerable. International organizations, such as the IUCN, have included the forest giraffe in the list of vulnerable species, and programs are underway to preserve their natural habitats, create reserves, and conduct scientific research to understand the biology of these animals. Scientists note that forest giraffes remain relatively poorly studied compared to savannas, and each new fact about their behavior, nutrition, and migration helps to develop more effective conservation strategies. Thus, forest giraffes are amazing representatives of the giraffe genus that have adapted to life in the dense forests of Central Africa. Their smaller size, short neck, dark coloration, cautious lifestyle, and specialized diet make them unique among their savanna relatives, and the study and conservation of these animals is important for maintaining the ecosystem of the forest and the biodiversity of the region.
What kind of fruit plant did people use back in the Neolithic era? One of the most ancient fruit plants used by humans back in the Neolithic era is the apple tree. Archaeological and paleobotanical studies show that people began to collect and consume apples about 10,000 years ago, when they gradually moved from hunting and gathering to a sedentary lifestyle and the beginning of agriculture. At that time, apples grew wild in what is now Asia Minor, the Caucasus, and Europe, and people harvested them from forest trees, choosing the largest and sweetest fruits. These first apples, of course, were very different from modern varieties. They were small, sour, and with a hard core, but even then, people understood their nutritional value and the ability to store for a long time. With the development of agriculture and the appearance of vegetable gardens and orchards, people gradually began to cultivate apple trees, selecting plants with tastier and larger fruits for subsequent reproduction. This became one of the first forms of breeding, when a person consciously changed the characteristics of a plant to his advantage. In the Neolithic era, apples were used not only as food, but also as an element of rituals and a symbol of fertility. They were appreciated for their sweet taste, high calorie content, and the possibility of transportation and storage. Dry or slightly dried fruits could be preserved for several months, which was extremely important for nutrition in winter. In addition to apples, Neolithic people used other fruit plants such as wild pears, rose hips, plums, and nuts, but the apple tree stood out among them for its versatility and ability to cultivate. Interestingly, the apple tree is associated with some of the first human attempts to consciously control plant reproduction, seed selection, cuttings, and planting in convenient places, which later led to the emergence of many varieties. In regions with a mild climate, apple trees began to multiply actively and naturally, and humans only intensified this process by creating the first orchards. In addition to food,
apples also had medicinal value. In Neolithic times, people used the fruits, leaves, and even the bark of the tree to make decoctions and infusions that helped with colds, abdominal pain, and other ailments. Thus, the apple tree became not only a source of food, but also an important element of the cultural and economic life of a person of that time. Over the millennia, apples spread throughout Europe and Asia. They began to be exchanged between tribes, used for jam, wine, and other products, which contributed to the development of agriculture and trade. In addition, the apple tree played a symbolic role in the mythology and culture of different peoples, and in later eras, it became associated with fertility, knowledge, and longevity. Returning to the Neolithic, it is important to emphasize that the apple tree demonstrates how a person began to interact with nature not only as a collector, but also as a conscious agricultural activist, able to change and improve the environment around him. It was this process that became the foundation for the subsequent development of agriculture, horticulture, and civilization in general. Thus, the apple tree is one of the first fruit plants that humans used, cultivated, and modified, and its significance for the history of mankind cannot be overestimated. It symbolizes the beginning of conscious human interaction with the plant world, the first steps of breeding, and the emergence of agricultural culture, without which modern agriculture would be unthinkable. Is there bird's milk? Bird's milk is a unique and unusual phenomenon in the animal kingdom that actually exists, although it is very different from mammalian milk and is not a liquid that can be drunk immediately. The term bird's milk is used mainly in relation to the feed that some bird species secrete to feed their chicks. The most famous are pigeons and some species of birds of the goose family, for example, penguins. In pigeons, bird's milk is produced in the goiter, a special enlarged area of the esophagus. When adult birds feed their chicks, they regurgitate this nutrient directly into the nestling's beak. It looks like a thick whitish mass and is characterized by a high content of protein and fats necessary for the rapid growth of young birds. Biologically, bird's milk looks like a thick mixture of digested food, mucosal cells, and secretions that form in the goiter glands. It contains proteins, fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals that ensure the proper nutrition of the chick at an early stage of life. The process of producing bird's milk is regulated by hormones, including prolactin, which stimulates secretion and influences parental caregiving behavior. In pigeons, this process begins immediately after the chicks hatch and can last for several days until the chicks are able to digest more solid food. Bird's milk also plays an important role in penguins, especially in emperor penguins. During the period when the female lays an egg and the father remains to guard it in the cold, the chick receives nutrition with the help of this unique secret. Penguins have high fat content in bird's milk, which allows them to survive in extreme conditions and gain weight quickly. Interestingly, bird's milk is formed differently in different bird species. In pigeons, it is more liquid and easily digestible. In penguins, it is thick and high in calories. In some other species, for example in fruit-eating birds, the goiter secret even contains specific enzymes that promote the digestion of fruits. Bird's milk performs not only a nutritional function, but also an immune function. It contains antibodies and other biologically active substances that help the chick to resist infections in the first days of life, when its own immune system is not yet developed. Thus, bird's milk is not an analog of cow's milk, which can be consumed by an adult, but a specialized food for chicks, ensuring their growth, protection, and development. Due to this phenomenon, birds are able to feed their offspring in conditions where other food sources are unavailable or insufficiently nutritious. People have sometimes tried to use bird's milk for their own purposes, for example, as experimental food additives, but its production cannot be scaled, and it remains an exclusive feature of nature. Bird's milk also inspired culture and mythology. In folklore and literature, it is often perceived as a symbol of something rare, nutritious, and magical. Even in the names of sweets, such as famous candies, this term is used to convey the idea of special value and unusual taste. Thus, bird's milk exists and plays a vital role for the chicks of some bird species. It provides rapid development, protection from diseases, and nutrition in the first days of life, demonstrating the amazing adaptations of nature to the survival of offspring. This phenomenon shows how evolution has created unique life support mechanisms that are different from those familiar to mammals, and highlights the diversity of strategies that animals use to preserve the species.
Why do birds control their territory? Birds control their territory for several important reasons related to survival, reproduction, and efficient use of resources. A territory is an area that a bird, or a pair of birds, actively protects from its relatives, and its size depends on the species, food availability, population density, and season. Territory control provides access to food, nesting sites, and safe resting areas, which is especially important in competition with other birds and animals. One of the main functions of territorial behavior is the protection of resources. Birds, especially during the breeding season, need a stable food source to feed their chicks and maintain their own health. If the territory is not protected, other birds may use food, nests, and shelters, which reduces the chances of successful reproduction. Territorial cues include singing, displays of bright plumage, postures, and visual and audible warnings. The male's singing at the border of the site simultaneously performs two functions. It warns rivals about the occupation of the territory and attracts the female, demonstrating strength, endurance, and the ability to provide offspring. The size of the territory varies greatly in different species. Small birds, such as tits or sparrows, may have an area of only a few hundred square meters, while birds of prey, such as eagles or hawks, have an area of several square kilometers. The poorer the area with resources, the larger the territory, because the bird needs more space to get food. Territory control is not limited to the nesting period only. Some species, especially sedentary ones, maintain the boundaries of the site all year round in order to have guaranteed access to food in winter when resources are limited. During the breeding season, territorial behavior is particularly pronounced, as it is directly related to the success of gene transfer to the next generation. There are also species with temporary territory control. For example, in migratory birds, a site may be temporarily occupied during migration for rest and feeding, and then abandoned. Such strategies help to optimize energy and reduce conflicts with neighbors. Interestingly, in some social bird species, such as sparrows or starlings, the territory can be controlled collectively. A group or family protects the site, forages together for food, and protects the chicks, which increases the chances of survival of all participants. Territorial behavior is governed by instincts, hormones, and experience. Hormones, especially testosterone in males, increase aggressiveness and activity during the breeding season, and experience allows the bird to effectively evaluate neighbors, recognize weak competitors, and avoid unnecessary conflicts. Trespassing by other birds leads to demonstrations of force, harassment,
and sometimes physical altercations. This can be a short-term warning or a prolonged clash, depending on the importance of the site and the strength of the enemy. Territory control is also related to the safety of offspring. The nest and feeding area are protected from potential predators and competitors, and a bright alarm about the occupation of the site reduces the likelihood of invasion and loss of eggs or chicks. In addition, territory plays a role in social status. Strong and experienced males usually have the best areas, which increases their attractiveness to females. Successful retention of territory and resources is directly related to the reproductive success and survival of the species. Thus, territory control in birds is a complex behavior that ensures access to food, protection of offspring, social status, and survival. It manifests itself through visual and audio signals, aggression, and strategic use of space. Without this mechanism, many bird species would not be able to successfully reproduce and maintain populations in a competitive and constantly changing environment. Who invented the helicopter? The helicopter, as an aircraft with vertical takeoff and landing, was the result of a long development of mankind's ideas about flight, and its invention is associated with several scientists and engineers working at different times. But the main one is considered to be the Russian engineer and inventor Igor Sikorsky. The history of the helicopter begins with concepts that originated in ancient times. Back in the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci developed drawings of the so-called air rifle, a device resembling a modern helicopter propeller. He proposed using rotating blades to lift into the air, but the materials and technologies of that time were not enough to realize this idea. In the 19th century, scientists experimented with toy models and machines that could rise into the air using rotating propellers, but all attempts were limited by the strength of human muscles or steam engines, which made flight impossible for humans. The first practical step towards creating a helicopter was taken at the beginning of the 20th century, when engineers began using piston engines capable of providing sufficient power to rotate the blades. In 1907, Frenchman Paul Cornu created an apparatus that could take to the air for a short time, but it was unstable and could not carry out controlled flight. Further development took place in parallel in Europe and the USA. In the 1930s, the Germans and French built experimental machines with vertical takeoff and improved stabilization systems, but these devices remained more experimental than practical. A key stage in the helicopter's history is associated with Igor Sikorsky, who emigrated from Russia to the United States. In 1939, he created the VS-300, a device with a main rotor and a tail rotor that allowed flight control and stability. This helicopter was able to take off, maneuver, and land safely, making it the first practically viable helicopter. Sikorsky continued to improve the design, increasing engine power, improving aerodynamics and control systems. In 1942, his car became the first production model used for practical tasks. Sikorsky helicopters soon found use in the military, rescue operations, and civil aviation, thanks to their ability to take off and land in confined spaces, which was impossible for fixed-wing aircraft. In the following decades, the development of helicopters accelerated. New designs with multiple rotors, turboshaft engines, increased payload, and the ability to transport passengers over long distances have appeared. The development of electronics and automatic control systems has made helicopters safe and manageable even in difficult weather conditions. Despite Sikorsky's success, It is important to understand that the helicopter is the result of centuries of development of ideas and experiments, starting with Leonardo da Vinci and continuing with the work of engineers in Europe, Russia, and the USA. Each stage added new knowledge about aerodynamics, engine power, balancing, and control, which eventually led to the creation of a modern helicopter. Today, helicopters are used in a variety of fields: rescue operations, transportation, military aviation, agriculture, and exploration of hard-to-reach areas. They remain unique aircraft that, thanks to vertical takeoff and landing, can perform tasks that are not available to conventional aircraft. Thus, the invention of the helicopter is the result of the joint work of many engineers, the accumulation of knowledge and experiments, but Igor Sikorsky is considered the main practical creator of the modern guided vehicle, whose contribution made the helicopter not just a concept, but a real tool for humanity. What games did children play 4,000 years ago? 4,000 years ago, children played games that, despite their simplicity, served important social, educational, and developmental functions. Archaeological excavations show that various toys and playsets existed in different regions of the world, from simple figurines and doll objects to board games with bone or wooden elements. In Mesopotamia, for example, small figures of animals and people were found, as well as miniature carts on which children could roll small stone or clay balls. These games developed motor skills, understanding of space, and cause and effect relationships. In ancient Egypt, archaeologists have discovered board games such as Senet, which is considered one of the oldest known games in the world. The children played simplified versions of this game, imitating adult behavior and learning the rules of strategy, randomness, and interaction with a partner. Such games not only entertained, but also prepared children for adulthood, taught planning and foreseeing the consequences of actions. In China at that time, simple dolls made of clay or cloth were used, as well as various balls and small balls for outdoor games. These classes developed coordination, agility, and team skills. Throwing and catching games were popular in many cultures, which promoted physical development and preparation for hunting or military craft in the future. Playing with stones, sticks, and bones served not only as entertainment, but also as a training of strength, accuracy, and patience. In Northern Europe and in what is now Russia, children used dolls and figurines, as well as simple toy carts and sleds made of wood. Often such games imitated the activities of adults, which helped to master everyday skills and social roles. An important element of the games was interaction with other children, learning the rules of teamwork and social norms, which contributed to the development of communication skills and the formation of friendships. In addition, archaeological finds show the presence of simple sports games, such as running competitions, jumping, or throwing small objects. They were part of celebrations and rituals, helped to keep fit, and laid the foundations for team competitions, which could later develop into more complex sports. The games also served an educational function. With the help of miniature models, children learned to understand the structure of the house, rural equipment, animals, and crafts. This made it easier for children to adapt to adulthood, understand the structure of society, and the distribution of responsibilities in the family and community. Despite the differences in cultures and regions, all the games of that time had in common their practical significance. They developed the body, mental abilities, social skills, and prepared children for adulthood in a specific environment. The games were closely related to everyday life, repeating elements of adult work, natural phenomena, and cultural traditions, which made the learning process natural and interesting. Thus, 4,000 years ago, children's games were a combination of physical activity, imitation of adult life, strategic tasks, and simple entertainment. They were an important element of socialization, preparation for adult activities, and the development of skills necessary for survival and successful existence in society. These games show that even in the distant past, humanity appreciated learning through play and understood its role in personality formation. And many of the principles of ancient games have been preserved to this day in modern children's activities and entertainment. Who invented the airplane? The invention of the airplane is the result of many years of research, experiments, and engineering developments by many people. But it is officially believed that the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright from the USA, were the first to successfully create a controlled, heavier-than-air aircraft. Even in ancient times, mankind dreamed of flying, and the first attempts were connected with gliders and balloons. In the 15th to 19th centuries, engineers and inventors in many countries created glider models, studied aerodynamics, wind, and lifted light structures into the air. Leonardo da Vinci, in his drawings, proposed the idea of flying machines with wings imitating birds, but he did not have the technical capabilities to implement them. In the 19th century, Otto Lilienthal from Germany conducted numerous successful glider flights, studying air behavior and control methods. His work significantly influenced the understanding of aerodynamics and gave practical experience to future designers. The Wright brothers, who were involved in the bicycle business, used their knowledge of mechanics and control to create an aircraft with an engine and steerable wings. The key feature of their design was the ability to control the aircraft in 3 axes: roll, pitch, and yaw, which ensured stability in flight. On December 17, 1903, at Kitty Hawk Beach in North Carolina, Orville Wright made the first controlled flight on a 36.5-meter-long flyer in 12 seconds. During the same day, the brothers made several more flights, gradually increasing the distance and time in the air. Their device had a wooden frame, fabric wings, and a 12-horsepower engine. The aircraft was lighter than air, but its design and control system made it possible to stay in the air and adjust flight. After 1903, Wright continued to improve his machines, creating new models with more power, longer wings, and an improved control system. They demonstrated flights, trained pilots, and sold their designs, which helped spread aviation around the world. Shortly after the success of the Wright brothers, aviation began to develop rapidly. Designers in Europe, Russia, and other countries have begun to create their own vehicles, increasing speed, range, and payload. The first airplanes appeared for passenger transportation, postal delivery, and military purposes. In the first decades of the 20th century, aviation developed rapidly, driven by improvements in engines, materials, and aerodynamic knowledge. Thus, the invention of the airplane was not an instant event, but the result of thousands of years of dreams and experiments. The Wright brothers are considered the founders of the guided aircraft, but their success was possible thanks to the discoveries and observations of many predecessors, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Otto Lilienthal, and other engineers. The aircraft ushered in a new era in human history, allowing people to travel long distances in a short time, explore new territories, and develop transportation, trade, and military strategy. Today, airplanes are used worldwide for passenger and cargo transportation, scientific research, and emergency operations, and the Wright brothers' idea remains a symbol of the human dream of flight. The ability to combine knowledge, observation, and engineering creativity to achieve the impossible.